why don't we start from the beginning? What is your personal history with Mortal Kombat as a video game? How does that translate to you getting the call for this? What do you bring from your past to this assignment? Talk me through that.
Sure thing. Yeah. So the first memory I had of Mortal Kombat was probably in a Kmart in New Jersey, where I tricked my mom into buying it for me for the Sega Genesis because yeah, at the time it was the first, that game created the entertainment, was part of the reason the entertainment ratings board for video games even came into existence. So yeah, it was one of the first game I think to be rated MA. I believe at the time it was like 15 or 16 was the rating. So I was like 14, so I had to get my mom to go and buy it. So that was my first experience, and then from there, I just became a huge fan. I would go to the arcade after school every day. We had an MK2 machine in my bowling alley in my town, little town in South Jersey, and that was just our place to go. We just hung out there for hours. It was like kind of like our little secret society where a bunch of geeks could just feel safe for a few hours. So since then, over the years, yeah, I've just played all the games. I've continued to follow them. They've gotten so much bigger. They've expanded so much since those early days. But it's a hell of a franchise. And yeah, I had been working for a few years, about 5 years as a writer out in Hollywood, and then I was working with New Line on a project, and I knew that project was in development. So I kind of told them, I said, I kind of told everybody I knew, like, if it opens up, please keep in mind, I'm a huge fan. I really love this. I think I can really help. And so it did. And thankfully I got the call, and then it was a long process. Then it was about 5 years I was on the project.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Were there any kind of little, just for that group of geeks in the bowling alley, kind of Easter eggs you threw in for them?
Oh yeah. There's so many Easter eggs in this. It's insane. Um, I'll say one thing, because those were the old school machines. So that was the MK2 and MK1. They were the two big arcade games, and then three was in the arcade too. But yeah, what we put in a lot of references, and some of the fatalities in the movie are pulled from those old classic games. So the iconic ones that you remember, in the arcade, will be transferred to the big screen for the first time.
Yeah. What is it like to write out those iconic fatalities? What is it like to write out, and even just like the kind of more basic fight scenes? What is your process for writing out ultraviolence like that?
Yeah, so the process, first of all, is as fun as it would be just to throw it in there wherever you want to throw it. The trick and the real work comes into figuring out where it makes sense for these things to land and how they need to land so that they have an impact on the story and the characters. Because as fun and as flashy as they are, we wanted them to actually mean something. That was part of it. We knew we were going to have them, but if it didn't mean anything, if it just landed with just like just kind of like, oh look, there's the flashy fatality, then I think you're doing it a disservice, right? And so as the writer, that's the first thing you try to figure out. It's like, all right, where is the fatalities going to go? And same thing for the fight scenes, right? This movie's Mortal Kombat. We know there's going to be a lot of fighting. So the question more is, where do we stage those fights? How do we put them into the story so that they have impact on the characters, so they have impact on the emotional journey of the characters, and so they matter to the stakes of what's happening? It's very, so that's the first thing. And then from there, when you actually execute them, it's all about just trying to, write the coolest stuff you can. It sounds silly, but it's true. And so I wanted to pull from the game. I didn't want to go in making up a ton of original stuff. I wanted to be as faithful as possible as I could to the source material. So, that required me to go through all the move sets, to go through, to watch a lot of videos of, a lot of the videos straight from the game, just watching them fight, seeing how they go about it. And then you try to execute that as best you can, without having your fight scenes run 5-6 pages. Try to do it in an economical way, and then knowing full well that in the process of filmmaking, a lot of people are going to come in and they're going to add their own input to it, and that's exactly what happened. So it's funny. I can watch the movie and pull out and said, oh, I remember writing that little fight, and then there's other stuff I watch. I'm like, wow, that was such an awesome addition that was added by the director or the stunt coordinator or the actor in the moment. So many people bring a lot to the table.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You mentioned, I think you were on this project for 5 years of development.
Yeah.
What were some of the kind of previous versions of your draft or the project that, I don't know, maybe you're like hanging on to, like, ooh, what could have been, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's so look, it's when it comes to screenwriting, it's a collaborative process. You're working with a lot of people. Ultimately, you're the one putting on the page, but what goes on the page is the process of a collaboration of of a whole group. So sometimes as a writer, I love the lore, I love the mythology a lot. So one thing I do, and I tend to do, is I'll tend to go into it a little bit too deep, right? So I'll have characters talking about, their backstories for a couple pages, and then when you get down to it, you start to realize that it doesn't need that much, the natural part of any filmmaking process is editing, right? And it's editing across. It's not just the picture; it's the script, it's everything. So you're always kind of trying to find ways to tell the best story you can in the most and sometimes the most concise way you can, and the simplest way. Especially when it comes to something like Mortal Kombat, where there's a lot of mythology, there's a lot of lore, a lot of characters. You don't want people to get lost. And so part of the answer, the real answer to that is that, yeah, I have probably scenes on my desktop that run 3-4 pages of people just talking about all this dense mythology. It didn't belong in the movie. It was right to be pared down.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's get into the nuts and bolts of the movie itself a little bit. One decision I find really interesting is the idea of centering it around a new character, Cole Young. And I'm curious where that decision came from. What do you think it adds to the story? And if there are any other versions of, like, was there a draft where Liu Kang was our protagonist, or Sonya, or etc.?
Yeah, so the idea of a new protagonist was something that that predated my involvement. It was something that was a decision that the studio liked. And when I came in, I read the draft and I said, I can see what we can do with this. I think we can strengthen it. And so the reason that I really liked this idea was that it allows us as storytellers to bring something new to the table. For me, it felt like while the primary objective was to be faithful to the mythology as much as we possibly could and to the lore, we also wanted to make sure that we weren't just retelling the same thing that had been told 100 times before that. This was never going to be a remake of the old film. This was a reboot. So for that, it was, how are we going to add something new to the story? There were never any drafts where Liu Kang or Sonya or Johnny Cage were the main characters. And what I'll say is, I've always looked at this as an ensemble. I always think that while we have a point of view in Cole Young that brings us into that world, and that's part of the reason for his being, is that he allows the audience to kind of venture into this very dense mythological world and allows us to get through a lot of what we have to tell the audience in a more organic way. It was never that he was going to become like the poster child and take over the whole thing. It was always that it would become an ensemble, and all those kind of iconic classic characters would kind of be unlocked along your journey, so that by the end, they'd all get their little moments to shine and their screen time, and then at the end you'd kind of end up in this Justice League Avengers style ensemble group. So that was part of it, and it was trying to be original, trying to bring something new to the table, trying to give the audience a way into the movie. And also part of my job in bringing a new character in was making sure that if we were going to do that, that he felt like he felt part of that universe, that he was tied into this story, that he was tied into the characters in a way that allowed him to live and breathe in that world without feeling like he was this kind of fish out of water just thrown in for no reason.
Yeah, that makes sense. You brought up the original 90s film. Full disclosure, I get like kind of made fun of in the Collider Slack. I'm a huge fan of the 90s Mortal Kombat film.
You're ashamed of, my friend.
What's that?
Nothing to be ashamed of.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. I didn't have anything to do with it. Why am I thanking you? I'm curious, what were elements of that film that you were maybe trying to purposefully borrow from, and what were you purposely trying to avoid from that film?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I love the original too. People that made this movie love the original. They made the movie, right? So this is the studio that did it in 1995, and we love it. And so part of our respect for it was that we wanted to make sure that we weren't just carbon copying their story, because that movie exists. And I felt like it would be doing the brand and that film a disservice, so we just tried to stick too closely to it. So one thing we wanted to avoid was just, we didn't want to tell the same story. Plus, since in the 25 years, Mortal Kombat has expanded its storylines to incredible places. If you go back and watch the original Scorpion and SubZero, they're silent antagonists. They don't do anything other than kind of have a couple fight scenes, and that's it. So those characters have grown exponentially in Mortal Kombat over the years, and have arguably become the poster children of the franchise now. So we wanted to lean into that for our adaptation and really give the fans the Scorpion and Sub-Zero stuff that they never got in 1995. I wanted to stick closely. I think everyone wanted to stick closely to the tone too. We loved kind of that wink, wink kind of cheesiness of the '95 film. It's part of what made it great. It's part of what we remember. It's part of the nostalgia that we remember from seeing that movie. So, as a writer, you try to pull some of that essence out and make sure that it still appears in the reboot. You're just going to add a little crusting sometimes of that great 95 Mortal Kombat cheese if you can. That was part of it. And there's little nods and things. There's lines of dialogue that were iconic to the 95 film that I felt was important to bring into this. Like "it has begun" and all these, iconic lines that you remember when you saw that film. So we wanted to find places for that as well, just to give little shout outs and nods to it.
Yeah. You brought up kind of focusing on SubZero and Scorpion. I really enjoyed, there was a very profound sort of sorrow in this tale of revenge, and I love the way it frames the picture. What were some of the influences in the way you depicted their kind of journey, especially maybe with the different languages and the different cultures kind of coming to a head?
Yeah, that was, so just to speak of that last part first, part of in the design of that sequence, the opening sequence is a 13-minute sequence that takes place in 17th century Japan. And it was about being authentic as much as possible. And that was kind of one of the running rules, I think. Where can we be authentic to the source material and to the story? And having the actors speak their native languages, and one is Chinese and one is Japanese, was just part of that authenticity. And you may look at that and say, wow, that's a pretty bold move for a Hollywood film to open their movie with a period setting where actors aren't speaking English. Mm-hmm. But nobody objected to it. I think everybody just wanted to tell, like I said, the most authentic story possible. And for Scorpion and Sub-Zero's arc, I knew that it was important. The trick with any of these things is how do you tell a story that that takes place back then, but that also matters to today, because we didn't want this film to take place in the past, so we wanted to have a modern through line to it. So it was trying to figure out, okay, if I've got this very emotional setup, and I'll just speak to that because when you're adapting something like Mortal Kombat, I'm trying to find emotion anywhere I can, because this isn't it's not this profoundly deep emotional IP. It's so when I looked at it and I said, where can I pull out the emotion? I looked at Scorpion's backstory, right? Mm-hmm. And it is tragic, and it's probably the most tragic thing in the whole IP. So I said, I want that to be part of it. I think that needs to be part of it. I think we need to start there. And then it was a matter of, okay, if I'm going to start there, then it has to matter later. So how do I find a way to bring it back into the story so that it has an emotional payoff at the end of the story as well? So then I decided I was going to find a way to bookend that chapter, Scorpion and Sub-Zero at the beginning and at the end, but not just have them be isolated sequences. That throughout the meat of the movie, you're tracking that story, and then that's where Cole really became an essential part of my story. Is I knew I could use him to bridge the Scorpion and Sub-Zero storyline with the modern day storyline. And without giving anything away there, it's that then I started to see, okay, I can see a path. I can see a way to connect these dots throughout the journey.
Let's touch on another kind of iconic pair in the film, but this one, I was intrigued by how it was a little bit deconstructed from how we normally see them. Sonya and Kano are sort of like tenuous allies in this take on the material.
I don't know about that. All right, we'll say tenuous.
Tenuous. They, the enemy of my enemy kind of. Yeah. And I'm curious where that decision. They almost gave me gritty buddy cop comedy kind of vibes. Where did the decision to sort of put them together come from?
Yeah, so it's a narrative decision, right? So basically the idea is when you're constructing your story, let's say I've got three protagonists. Let's mix it up and say that the movie was Sonya, Liu Kang, and Cole. So there's three heroic characters that are going on their journey, and they're trying to figure out what's going on, but they all have one unified POV. They all have one perspective, which is we got to go figure this out, and we got to beat the bad guys. Well, when you write that, when you start to see that, it starts to feel very one-sided. And so what I always like to do as a writer is I always try to find conflict wherever I can, because conflict drives narrative and conflict drives character. So for me, it was, how do I add conflict into the mix of those protagonists' journey? And the best way to do it is to drop somebody in there like a wild, fox in a chicken pen. And that's Kano. And he's a guy that has his own self-serving, egotistical, asshole desires, and he's going to pursue them no matter what. And what that does is it immediately gives me conflict. It allows him to be a problem and a pain in the ass for our heroes as they go on their journey. And it's always more of a rewarding setup to have for your characters, is to have conflict like that. So that was the idea of putting Kano in the mix. And then Josh added so much to it. he's a great actor and brought a lot to it. So is Jess and as well. And so that kind of Sonya Kano, right on the edge of killing each other. There's literally scenes where they almost do. Just became a great way for me to put conflict in the movie.
We see the poster with Johnny Cage. He says, "I'm heading to Hollywood." Did that come from you? Was Cage always the character we were going to tease? What does that mean for the future of this franchise?
No. So basically the idea is like movie one, we were always kind of setting this up as, well, I was setting it up. I don't know. It's basically in my head. I always saw it as pre-tournament, right? Pre-tournament, then hopefully tournament, then post-tournament. So the idea was like, this was going to be a pre-tournament movie that would hopefully sow the seeds for the tournament, the final.
So from the beginning, you kind of conceived this as a trilogy, chapter one, so to
my
speak.
mind.
Yeah, interesting.
As a writer, you, and this is, by the way, this was the overall. Everybody was focused on movie one. You don't get a trilogy without it. So, but as a writer, you should never be painting yourself in a corner. That's my motto. You should always be thinking about where can your story go, even beyond the 2 hours there's not a lot of time. So the 2 hours I have to tell this story, where else can it go? So I saw it as kind of leading up to something bigger. And so the idea then became, all right, we're going to have, we have a certain amount of characters we can fit, don't have the luxury of having individual movies of all these characters. I get thrown right into Avengers mode, which is fun and a challenge. But I knew that there were other characters I couldn't get in, and it actually didn't even make sense to bring in yet for the story. So yeah, then it became a matter of well, who's the big characters that we want to save? Because you also don't want to you don't want to use everything. And so yeah, Johnny's tease at the end. The button, it changed different ways. I remember there were different versions of it. That poster was something that the design team did, which I love. I picked Citizen Cage because I just loved. I thought that was hilarious. Fight for your rights. So I picked that and put it in the script, and then they designed that amazing poster. And then it had lived in other places, so it actually wasn't the button for a while. Earlier in the story, like they were walking and you just see it in the background. And we felt like that just wasn't enough. I think it just felt like it wasn't enough. So you wanted to really hit on it. And I remember there was a version for the end where they actually went to like the lot. So Cole and the other Sonya and went to like the studio lot, and I forget what it even was. They like pulled up and it was like they were going right. It was going to be shot at Warner Brothers, right? And they were going to the meeting, but it just felt like with the pandemic and everything, it just got to a point where it was hard to do a lot of that. So I think I love the way that it kind of buttons and it's simple, and yeah, hopefully we can tell more of those stories.
Absolutely. Was there ever a moment, did it get far enough into pre-production or production where Johnny Cage was cast actually?
No.
Gotcha.
Never cast. No, that's I guess that's part of why you see him from the waist down.
Good point.
Still making trick, yeah.
I think I've only got a little more time with you, so let's move a little bit away from Mortal Kombat. Yeah. I'm curious about a Saints Row movie.
Sure, yeah.
That you're attached to, and I'm especially curious because for me, what's fun about that game, or what can be fun about that game, is the open world aspect of it, the kind of chaotic, I can do anything goes kind of thing. What is your goal? What is your tactic to kind of funneling that into one kind of cogent story?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, right? I mean, I love the franchise. I've played all the games, huge fan of it, and we have director F. Gary Gray, who's attached to it, who's an amazing, visionary director. Has done some incredible, some of my favorite films, including Set It Off, which I still think is one of the best.
Oh, I love Set It Off.
it's fantastic.
It's so
So
good.
he's got a great vision for it. He knows what he wants to do. I think from a storytelling perspective, it was, it was two things. It was the tricky things with something like Saints Row is going to be tone right away, right? Because if you know the franchise, you know that it basically had two tones. It has more of the gritty tone, which is the first couple movies, and then it goes kind of bonkers and just absolutely insane. And so we wanted to make sure that we weren't isolating either of those. So it's about just trying to find the tonal balance where you have real characters, real stakes. Again, it was part of it with Mortal Kombat too. It's like you want it to feel real. You want the characters to feel real as much as possible, but you also want to lean into what made it fun and lean into that craziness. So part of it was trying to figure out that tone, which I think it's finally gotten into a place where it makes sense. And then it was a matter of what kind of movie is this? Because how do you take an open world movie and tell a story? So, I looked at different films that I really love. I'm a big fan of 70s cinema. So I looked at The Warriors. I looked at Escape from New York.
Oof, you're speaking my language.
Yeah, just some of those classics. And I said, well, how do we kind of pull from some of those and tell our own unique story? So I'm excited for it. We'll see.
That's awesome. So am I. Last question for you. What is the Space Invaders film looking like?
This is one's really a passion project of mine. When
Yeah.
one thing when I got it, it's funny. I first saw it a couple years ago, actually maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, and it came to me, and I was like, and I passed on it because I couldn't figure out. What I didn't want to do is I didn't want to do Independence Day. I didn't want to do a big alien invasion movie that I've seen 100 times. I always try to avoid that kind of stuff. So I couldn't figure it out. And then it came back around like a couple years ago, and I was like, I gotta figure this out because I love the original game. It's the grandfather of video games, really. It's still, I think, one of the biggest all-time selling games ever, right, in video game history. So I had to figure it out, and so I found a really unique way into it that's all focused on character and just emotion and heart. It sounds crazy when I'm talking about Space Invaders, but I pulled a lot from my own life growing up in New Jersey, and it's just this kind of it's a very emotional, personal story. So I hope it happens.
That's awesome, man. Thanks
Yeah.
so much for your time. Congrats on Mortal Kombat.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, my friend. Thank you
Yeah.
thank you for taking the time.